Morning all, let's have a look at the other key game yesterday in that Russia versus Armenia clash, the Titans playing each other. On board 2 we had Sergei Movsesian versus Alexander Grischuk. Okay, Movsesian's 2698, Grischuk's 2763. Okay, Sergei played c4, Grischuk played a King's Indian defense. Actually, we arrive in the King's Indian defense territory here. So white sets up that broad pawn center, which black hopes to usually undermine or gain some key squares like c5, for example. Okay, knight f3, and after castles white plays h3, which I presumed for quite a long time was designed against black playing e5. Makhachkov variation, I believe, h3. So black played e5 anyway, and okay, whites didn't play d takes e5 here, even though that might be tempting. Maybe black's got some dynamic ideas there. Let's not get into a theoretical debate though about this here. Let's just go into the game continuation, which was d5, and we get a kind of Boris Averbach variation to this annoying pin, bishop g5. Black's going for that c5 square now, marking that out. Doesn't have to immediately occupy it with a knight. After bishop e2, after bishop e2, black unpins the f6 knight now with queen e8. Okay, so we see in this position it's a classic King's Indian type position. White playing now knight d2. He's not routinely castling here. With knight d2, it's a multi-purpose move actually. It might be useful to play knight b3 in some variations. It might later be useful for c5 and knight c4 striking at d6 in some variations later as they emerge. Okay, and it's giving white the flexibility to still castle queenside if the opportunity arises. Black plays now knight d7, which means that the classic f5 is now on the cards. h6, sorry, a3 is played now. And with a3, potentially white is going to play b4 and leverage that pin on the a file. Okay, so black now plays h6, kicking that bishop. It goes to h4. Black has to be careful about playing g5 here. It would be weakening light squares a bit. Actually, he chooses knight b6. And now a very interesting move from white. g4, and with this it's a bit clearer that white's intention might be to try and castle queenside, try and restrain black or discourage black from playing f5, because we have potentially a capture and the use of the g file. In this position black plays actually a4, locking down a bit more on white's queenside pawns, and now we see f3, and now finally knight c5. So, queen c2, and white's intention seems to be now to castle queenside. c6, as though black is interested in drumming up potential c-file counterplay. Bishop f2, giving the option for white for bishop c5s at the appropriate moment. Bishop d7, and now white castles queenside. And black plays c takes d. And now actually white plays e takes d5, which potentially gives white a nice access route along this diagonal and e4 control. Okay, but you might argue, well, black has f5 here. Black did play f5 here. If black is thematically interested in playing e4 to liberate the bishop, though, again, e4 could later come under white's control. And you might wonder, well, how is this going to be undermined? There is another undermining point of this pawn chain here. H4, H5 is possible to undermine G6 and F5 here. First, King B1. Bit of prophylaxis against Rook C8 and the dangers of Rook C8. For the moment, there's no major tactical threats against the White King. Here, Bishop E3 is played. That is a very interesting move. And you might wonder what on earth it's about. I think it's just actually about tactical liability. Maybe on the cards is an idea of Fg and Bishop G4. So white with Bishop E3 is actually maybe in effect preparing H4 without that F-file disaster. So H4 being prepared. So Queen D8 and now H4. So the undermining operation is underway. White is trying to blast open this diagonal and also potentially get E4. Black plays a thematic looking, strong looking thematic move E4, which is often the classic move in the King's engine to make this bishop a monster on the diagonal. But it's not so clear cut here. F takes E4. Okay, and we have F takes G4, so we've got double pawns here for black, but G6 is about to be undermined even further with H5, starting to look a little bit unpleasant. Not only did that improve the bishop's position, avoiding tactical liability on the F-file, H6 is being pointed to now, making H5 more powerful as a move. So black plays G5, and here this is a great transaction in this position, a positional combination which is often thematic in Benoni type positions. Bishop takes C5, giving up the dark square bishop now to play this thematic counter pawn sacrifice E5. So it's white's bishop which is now being liberated on this diagonal, and white's use of E4 is emphasized. Black plays bishop F5, forcing light square bishop exchange before white can get there, and now bishop takes E5 is played, and this is very dangerous for black because of white's knight E4 coming up. Okay, you might ask, okay, what about D takes E5? Was that possible here? Let's just check that out briefly. D takes E5. I think it's still okay. It's good for white still, this position. It's not too far. I've got some stored analysis from earlier, so let's go with that. In the game continuation, bishop takes E5. So we have check. And then the knight goes to E4, hitting D6 as well. And black decides overall it's a good idea to sacrifice the exchange with rook takes C4. It does give seemingly very tasty ideas like, you know, Queen B6, you know, time, if black gets time to attack the white king, but black's not going to be given time here. After knight takes C4, rook DF1, immediate threats. Okay, this knight is also threatening some lines knight D2 check to just win that rook. So it'd be nice if this knight can be decoyed. And perhaps here, this was the idea of G3. Let's just rewind back though before we get into this exchange sack as in the game continuation. You might have asked also, what about just rook C7? Giving up D6 is an idea, and we still get a position which potentially, this is analysis from earlier, is potentially better for white. This kind of position is comfortable for white. So maybe this is why black really wanted to try this exchange sack with rook takes C4, as well as looking quite tasty. But yeah, white is playing on thin ice here. After G3, you know, the attempt to decoy the knight. So white has to play very carefully. He plays here, rook takes F8 check. Okay. Now a very incisive move actually. Rook E1. And the idea is now introduced of either knight G5 or knight F6 check for rook E8 winning the queen here. And there'll be enough time to get this pawn back. Okay. Black plays knight E5. So for example, if he did go with G2, knight F6 check, check, win the queen, but first queen E6 is even more accurate than immediately winning the queen, so the queen can slip back to G4 against this pawn. Okay, so let's go back to the game continuation. Knight E5, we have check. So this is a position, the exchange up for white after knight takes G3 for one pawn. White has 4 pawns, black has 5. So does black have any significant counterplay? Is this bishop really that dangerous on diagonal to justify this? What about these queen entrance points? They're dangerous as well. But black's king's a bit shaky here. Knight D3, rook F1. The knight blocks the F file, attacks the queen moves to D7 here. Queen F6 immediately threatening queen B2 mate. White covers this with check and check here, and now plays knight F5, threatening to get black's beautiful bishop. Black allows this actually in this position. It is quite dangerous now for black, because there's still some menacing threats. So black actually plays knight takes H5, and it's currently 2 pawns now for the exchange. Also knight takes G7. Sorry, it's not possible here. Black doesn't allow it. With knight takes H5, knight G7 is ruled out, the pin on F1. So rook E1 is really potentially threatening now knight takes G7. But in fact, no, knight G7 is not chosen. Rook E7, and it's coming in, the resources are coming in for black's king here. Bishop F8, rook takes B7, keeping on the cards nasty pinning ideas and nasty queen invasions. Queen C8, for example, holds the knight and pins the bishop. And in fact, okay, D5 is taken, so we have here again 2 pawns for the exchange, but now we have Queen C8. That invasory Queen C8 is threatening some nasties here. Potentially, like Rook G7 or other stuff, or Queen D7 coming into H7. Knight F4 is played. And now actually King A1, which means that Queen takes F5 won't be checked if the Queen ever moves off, to protecting that knight. Knight E6, attacking that knight in effect. Knight can take on D6, and it does. And now black tries his luck with these pawns, G4. But now again, very, very incisive play from white is demonstrated. Knight E4. Okay, allowing the check. Knight G7. And okay, can black fend off the attacking pressure here, making this pawn, for example, the hero of the game? Well, actually a really, really crushing move is played in this position to further white's attacking prospects. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay,
White plays queen c6, still making sure black has no queen c4 checks. If white had taken on g4, it looks as though queen c4 would be a very good move, but let's just absolutely check that one. Queen takes g4, I think it's a blunder, big blunder. It would be just be a draw by perpetual. So, but queen c6 not only maintains control of c4, but introduces knight f6 check, and then the idea of queen e6, which is really, really vicious. For example, if g3, knight f6 check, and we have queen e6 here, threatening mate, and if knight takes e6, there's rook h7 mate. It's a really crushing move, queen e6, which probably explains why black's keen to stop queen e6 in that variation. So queen f5, but unfortunately still very powerful attacking move here after knight f6. White plays rook f7, and I believe it's a forced mate here. It's the knight can't easily move without him to give up the queen, for example. Or, well, let's check this final position. What does black do here? Let's check. Black actually, after rook f7, resigned in this position. Grischuk resigned. So let's check some possible moves. Well, the rook is attacking the bishop, so there's not too many moves. If knight e6, then here queen d7, so threatening rook h7 mating. If bishop goes back here, then queen e8 check, and then rook takes f8 is mating. So that's pretty bad. There's not too much else. Knight e8, queen takes e8. What can black do? Bishop is just awkward. Bishop c5, queen a8 here is absolutely incisive according to the engine, mate in 3. So there's no other checks. This one and this one are ruled out. So actually queen a8 check is crushing. It's all going mate. So where else can the bishop move? I could try bishop e7 as a decoy. Again, queen a8 is even stronger than rook e7, or both are really strong. So that's pretty helpless after rook f7 actually. Knight h5. White can surely just take on f8 if nothing else. There's even more crushing moves as the engine points out, but I think just taking on here is crushing as well. So after rook f7, that really is all over. So what an interesting tactical battle in the King's Engine. Exchange sack, which was proven to be a bit too risky for black. Pawns never got the chance to queen. Let's have a look again. So King's Engine defense. I think Makaganov variation with h3 going to Boris Averbach variation. With a difference, with a twist. We've seen this at the London Classic on a previous video in this variation. London Classic last year, I think someone called Gupta had a very good win with it. Very important win. Which helps him win the London Classic in this variation. It's a very dangerous variation for black, really. It looks as though White's trying to well, have his cake and eat it. He's got space on the queen side, castling queen side, so he's got no problems with facing a black king assault on the king side with a king on g1 as a sitting target. It seems the king's quite safe here on b1 in this position, and so he's giving himself time for undermining black's structure by playing bishop e3. Also,
I mean, it's maintaining pressure options on c5 and h6, which are useful later. Black definitely doesn't want to play a move like f4 using the king's unit, because e4 would be such a nice knight for white. So here, undermining black's structure, provoking this thematic like pawn sacrifice, but now white plays his own thematic counter pawn sacrifice. Black plays a seemingly thematic exchange sack, which looks fairly logical to generate some counterplay and try and use his dangerous pawns. White has to play incisive, accurate chess to make sure this is working out for him. So that immediate threat introduced by rook e1 of knight f6 check here. Okay, and again, okay, so he's got that dangerous g-pawn. And he's still got some threats to deal with from black. He manages them very well. This double check to get back here, knight f5, and now this dangerous g-pawn emerges. So this final little battle scene to stop this g-pawn, to prove that white's exchange up is important. Taking on b7, and now the king moves, so that means now knight e6 is actually not with check anyway. This knight's less of a problem, but it takes on d6 here. G-pawn makes a run for it, but it's too late. It's too late. White has very crushing coordination here. After the key move, key attacking move, queen c6, which supports knight f6 check in this position, with the idea of queen e6. It's just so quick, this idea. Knight f6 and queen e6. There's a temporary queen sack for delivering a mate with this rook on the 7th. So black played queen f5 and we saw check, and rook f7 final move. So this helped draw the match actually, because otherwise Iranian's loss on board 1 would have been pretty bad for the Armenians. So Armenia and Russia drew yesterday 2-2. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.